In July 1973, an 11-year-old California girl left summer school and began the short walk home. She never made it. Less than 24 hours later, her body was discovered miles away from where she had disappeared. Investigators had a witness, a possible suspect vehicle, and a grieving family desperate for answers. But they had no name, no arrest, and no clear path forward. For the next 46 years, the identity of her killer remained one of Southern California's most haunting mysteries. Then, nearly half a century later, a breakthrough in forensic science exposed a man who had spent decades living freely while carrying a deadly secret. Before we uncover how investigators finally solved this extraordinary cold case, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Cases like this demonstrate how persistence, technology, and determination can sometimes succeed even when justice seems impossible. The victim was Linda N. O'Keefe. She was 11 years old and lived in Newport Beach, California, a coastal community known for its quiet neighborhoods and family-friendly atmosphere. Friends and family remembered Linda as bright, kind, and full of energy. She enjoyed spending time with friends and had her entire future ahead of her. During the summer of 1973, she was attending summer school. On the morning of July 6th, Linda followed her normal routine. Nothing about the day appeared unusual. Classes ended around midday. Students left campus. Parents expected their children home. For Linda, the walk should have taken only a short time. But somewhere between school and home, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses later reported seeing Linda speaking with a man inside or near a turquoise-colored van. The interaction did not immediately appear alarming. No one realized they were witnessing what would become a crucial moment in a murder investigation that would remain unsolved for decades. When Linda failed to return home, concern quickly spread through her family. Hours passed. Then more time passed. Soon, relatives and friends began searching for her. Authorities were notified. The possibility that something serious had happened became increasingly difficult to ignore. As evening approached, investigators launched a missing child investigation. Search efforts intensified. Officers interviewed witnesses. Volunteers joined the effort. Tips began arriving from members of the public. Everyone hoped Linda would be found safe. Instead, the case took a devastating turn. The following day, Linda's body was discovered in a remote area near Back Bay Drive. The search was over. A homicide investigation had begun. The news shocked Newport Beach. Residents struggled to understand how such a horrific crime could happen in their community. Parents worried about their own children. Schools and neighborhoods were gripped by fear. Meanwhile, detectives faced an enormous challenge. They needed to identify a killer who seemed to have vanished without a trace. Investigators worked tirelessly. They examined the crime scene. They interviewed witnesses. They collected physical evidence. And they focused heavily on reports involving the mysterious turquoise van. The vehicle quickly became one of the most important leads in the case. Unfortunately, identifying its owner proved extremely difficult. Witness descriptions varied. License plate information was unavailable. And despite extensive efforts, detectives could not determine who had been driving it. As weeks turned into months, frustration grew. The murder had generated significant public attention, yet investigators remained no closer to identifying a suspect. Every promising lead eventually reached a dead end. The lack of answers devastated Linda's family. They had lost a daughter, sister, and loved one. Now they faced another painful reality. The person responsible remained free. As the years passed, the case gradually entered a stage familiar to many cold case investigators. The initial momentum faded. Witness memories became less reliable. Potential evidence became harder to analyze. New cases demanded police resources. And eventually, Linda N. O'Keefe's murder became one of California's many unsolved homicides. But unlike some cold cases, this one was never forgotten. Generation after generation of investigators continued reviewing the file. New detectives inherited the case from those who retired before them. Evidence was preserved. Reports were maintained. And every time a major advancement occurred in forensic science, investigators revisited Linda's case. That decision would eventually prove critical. During the 1970s, many forensic techniques available today simply did not exist. DNA profiling had not yet become a standard investigative tool. Genetic genealogy was decades away. Digital databases capable of comparing evidence across jurisdictions were still in the future. As technology evolved, however, possibilities began to emerge. Detectives understood that even if they couldn't solve the case immediately, preserving evidence might allow future investigators to succeed. That foresight became one of the most important factors in the eventual resolution of the case. Years became decades. The world changed. Technology transformed criminal investigations. Cases once considered impossible suddenly became solvable. Across the United States, cold cases began falling as DNA analysis identified suspects who had escaped justice for years. Investigators watching these breakthroughs started asking an important question. Could the same thing happen in Linda's case? By the early 2000s, renewed forensic testing generated cautious optimism. Evidence collected in 1973 was examined using methods unavailable to the original investigators. Scientists searched for biological material that might identify the killer. Detectives reviewed thousands of pages of reports. Old witness statements were re-examined. Potential suspects were reconsidered. Yet despite these efforts, a definitive answer remained elusive. The case continued resisting every attempt to solve it. For Linda's surviving family members, the passing years created a painful contradiction. Time moved forward. Lives changed. But the unanswered questions remained exactly where they had been in 1973. Who killed Linda and O'Keefe? And would the truth ever be discovered? By 2018, 45 years had passed since the murder. Most people would have assumed the case would never be solved. But investigators in Newport Beach were preparing a strategy unlike anything they had attempted before. It would combine modern forensic science, public engagement, and emerging genetic technology. And before long, that strategy would produce the first real breakthrough in nearly half a century. In 2018, investigators with the Newport Beach Police Department decided to try something different. Traditional investigative methods had been exhausted. Decades of interviews, evidence reviews, and forensic examinations had failed to identify Linda and O'Keefe's killer. But detectives believed modern technology might finally succeed where previous efforts had fallen short. One of their most innovative strategies involved social media. Rather than simply releasing old case information, investigators launched a campaign that told Linda's story in a unique and deeply personal way. Posts were written from Linda's perspective. The campaign invited the public to follow the investigation as though Linda herself was describing what happened. The approach attracted national attention. Thousands of people engaged with the story. Media organizations highlighted the campaign. And most importantly, new tips began arriving. The effort generated renewed public interest in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly half a century. At the same time, detectives pursued another avenue that would prove even more important. Advances in forensic science had transformed what was possible in cold case investigations. Biological evidence collected decades earlier could now reveal information unimaginable in 1973. Scientists performed advanced DNA testing. Investigators explored DNA phenotyping, a process capable of predicting certain physical characteristics from genetic material. The results helped create a clearer picture of the unknown suspect. But detectives were not finished. They turned to one of the most powerful tools in modern criminal investigations: genetic genealogy. The technique had already helped solve several notorious cold cases. Rather than searching for an exact DNA match, genetic genealogy identifies relatives of an unknown suspect through publicly available genetic databases. Investigators can then build family trees and gradually narrow the search until a likely suspect emerges. The process requires enormous patience. Researchers often examine hundreds or even thousands of family connections. Every branch must be verified. Every lead must be tested. But when successful, the results can be extraordinary. In Linda's case, the strategy began producing promising leads. Genealogists and investigators worked together to trace family relationships connected to the unidentified DNA profile. Gradually, a name started emerging from the evidence. That name was James Alan Neal. For decades, Neal had lived largely unnoticed. Investigators discovered that he had changed his name and moved across different states over the years. While Linda's family waited for answers, Neal had built a life and remained free. Nobody had connected him to the murder. No arrest had ever been made. No charges had ever been filed. Yet the genetic evidence was pointing directly toward him. Detectives intensified their investigation. They examined Neal's history. They reviewed his movements during the period surrounding Linda's murder. They searched for opportunities to obtain a DNA sample for comparison. As the evidence continued accumulating, confidence grew. Investigators believed they had finally identified the man responsible for the 1973 murder. Still, one critical step remained. They needed definitive confirmation. In 2019, that confirmation arrived. DNA testing established a match between James Alan Neal and the evidence connected to Linda and O'Keefe's murder. After 46 years, investigators finally knew the identity of the killer. The announcement marked one of the most significant breakthroughs in Newport Beach Police Department history. For detectives who had spent years working the case, it was an emotional moment. 4 retired investigators who had never stopped hoping for answers, it represented the culmination of decades of effort. And for Linda's family, it brought long-awaited truth. On February 19, 2019, authorities arrested James Alan Neal. The arrest generated headlines across the country. Many people were stunned that a murder committed in 1973 had finally been solved. Others saw the case as proof that advances in forensic science were changing the future of criminal investigations. Cold cases once considered impossible were now being reopened and solved. The arrest also delivered an important message. Time does not erase evidence. And in many cases, it does not eliminate accountability. For a brief period, it appeared that Linda's family might finally see a trial. Prosecutors prepared the case. Investigators continued gathering evidence. The justice system began moving forward. But the story would take one final heartbreaking turn. Before he could stand trial, James Alan Neal died while in custody. The death meant prosecutors would never have the opportunity to present their case before a jury. There would be no courtroom testimony. No conviction. No verdict. No sentencing hearing. For many members of Linda's family, the news was deeply frustrating. After waiting nearly half a century for answers, they were denied the opportunity to witness a full judicial resolution. The truth had finally been uncovered. But complete justice remained out of reach. The outcome highlights one of the difficult realities of cold case investigations. Sometimes cases are solved so many years later that suspects die before trial. Families receive answers but lose the chance to see formal accountability delivered in court. It is a bittersweet form of closure. In Linda's case, however, investigators emphasized an important point. Although Neal would never face trial, the evidence had identified him. The mystery was over. The uncertainty that haunted the family for 46 years had finally ended. The truth was known. And that truth mattered. The case also became a powerful demonstration of how modern technology is transforming criminal investigations. In 1973, detectives lacked the tools needed to identify the killer. By 2019, genetic genealogy and advanced DNA analysis had accomplished what generations of investigators could not. The success encouraged law enforcement agencies across the country to revisit other cold cases. Many departments began exploring similar techniques. Dozens of long unsolved murders were eventually solved using the same methods. Linda and O'Keefe's case became part of a larger revolution in forensic science. There are several important lessons that emerge from this story. First, evidence preservation matters.